Our final speaker in this plenary is activist, academic, a patron of Stop the War, but of course he is most of all known for his music. It's great to have you here. Finalising this plenary, thank you, Lowkey.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It's great to be here. It is important that we emphasize at this point that not only was the war in Afghanistan and the war on terror a war of revenge, it was also a war of choice. In October 2001, the Taliban, through the Pakistani state acting as a middleman, offered Osama bin Laden to the United States. However, Bush refused the offer and went ahead with a war which has cost over $6.4 trillion over a period that is longer than World War I and World War II put together. It has entailed on average 46 bombs being dropped per day by the United States and their allies for 20 years and has displaced 37 million people. The war in Afghanistan alone has cost $2.2 trillion and around 250,000 lives. Let's not forget, when we talk about beneficiaries of this war, that 6 senior executives from Lockheed Martin, the company that has provided many of weapons for these wars, those 6 executives populated the George Bush administration. And in the same year that the war on terror was launched, Lockheed Martin got one of the biggest military contracts in the history of the United States. When we talk about US withdrawal, let's not forget that the Defense Department put out a statement at the beginning of this year saying that there were 18,000 private military contractors from the United States still in Afghanistan. What will happen to those contractors? That has not been made clear by the Biden administration. Even across the last few years alone, US counterterrorism operations have reached 85 countries. The US war on terror gave us Guantanamo Bay, where nobody was charged or convicted of any crime ever. And as WikiLeaks have revealed, that 2 of the people that were detained there were detained initially as 13-year-old children. We cannot forget that one of the youngest prisoners at Guantanamo Bay was a 17-year-old by the name of Yasser Talal al-Zahrani, who killed himself in his cell at the age of 21 years old. The International Criminal Court has found that there is reasonable basis to believe that the British Army has committed war crimes across this war on terror. And BAE Systems, who have profited handsomely off of this entire process, alone from the Saudi campaign in Yemen, have sold £17.6 billion worth of arms. This was a war that at the back end of the war on terror has led to the greatest humanitarian crisis that we have seen in a long time, but that exists today. Tens of thousands of people have died from starvation, and huge swaths of the population are in deep danger as we speak. We know that even following the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the British government, through their trade minister, Liam Fox, was falling over themselves to make sure that they could continue BAE Systems sales to the Saudi government. As Mark Curtis has documented over the last few years, Britain has been involved in 7 different covert wars, from Syria to Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya to Yemen to Pakistan and Somalia. Another poison and bitter fruit of the war on terror has been the militarization of British society. We have now 275 schools across the country that host combined cadet forces and work on militarizing the children of tomorrow. Hidden in the Afghan withdrawal announcement was Lloyd Austin putting forth that the US would reverse the planned 12,000 troop reduction proposed by Trump, and in fact increase the amount of troops present in Germany, US soldiers present in Germany, by 500. This is clearly about pivoting towards Russia. Now, the UK itself has 140 military bases in 42 countries around the world, not least in 5 countries around China. China is surrounded by 400 US military bases, and we see daily the astroturfing of anti-Chinese ideas in British media and US media sources. But let's not forget that we on this side are not the international community. We are isolated. Even within the Five Eyes network, governments which facilitate the United States spying on their own citizens, Australia is the largest trading partner with China. Brazil, who had an unprecedented close relationship with the United States under Bolsonaro, are now the largest trading partner. Their largest trading partner is China. Even in India, where the army under Modi really were vulnerable to being used by the United States against China, their largest trading partner is China. It's not only the world's second largest importer, but it knocked the United States, after over 100 years of being the world's largest exporter, off of that place. And it is for that reason that the Chinese economy is very quickly overtaking the United States. They have the Belt and Road Initiative, which put forth the idea of China investing in around 70 countries. The China Development Bank and China Export-Import Bank has actually carried out more loans in what we know as the Global South than the World Bank has. That key instrument of US foreign policy is waning in its influence on the Global South. We look at the 16+1 initiative that China has launched with Central and Eastern European states. 11 of those states involved in the 16+1 are EU member states. 4 of them are EU candidate countries. Greece and Italy are both getting closer to China. The United States and Britain, in their campaign to escalate hostilities towards China, would do well to remember the 56,000 US soldiers who died in Korea and the 58,000 US soldiers who died in Vietnam. One of the key attack lines which is being used to aim at China, as we saw the insufferable Emma Barnett on Newsnight this week putting it forward, is climate change. But let's not forget that 40% of China's energy consumption is for Western goods that are manufactured there. And in fact, between the mid-1700s and 2016, despite China being 18% of the world's population, they were responsible for 13% of emissions, whereas the United States, with only 4.2% of the world's population, was responsible for almost 30% of emissions. The United States, the United Kingdom, is only 0.8% of global population, but it is believed to be responsible for 5% of global emissions. If you look at per person, in the United States, 19.8 tons of carbon are produced per person, whereas in China, it is only 4.6 tons of carbon dioxide per person. So what we actually see is a situation where climate change is being put on the shoulders and in fact used to deepen war propaganda in that way. When we look at what Boris Johnson set out in his the end of the era of retreat, as he referred to it, you know, Britain's participation as the United States' junior partner in the war on terror could not be described as an era of retreat to most of us, but to him it was. So an overall increase in British military budget over a 4-year period of £24.1 billion. And Johnson made clear that over the next 4 years, that would be military spending of almost £200 billion. Now, when that was announced, The very next day, BAE Systems stock rose by 3%. Now, despite the largesse which is afforded to BAE Systems by the British state, it only represents 0.6% of Britain's GDP. But it is here that we arrive to the crux of the matter. The UK military and the arms companies involved with it are known to produce more carbon emissions than 60 individual countries. Now, Boris Johnson announced that they would look to bring forward the ban on new fossil fuel vehicles from 2040 to 2030. Well, then how do you explain pumping billions and billions of pounds into the very institution and the industries and companies which are responsible for so much climate change? Now, when he announced the bid to increase Trident, Lockheed Martin's stock rose by over 2% the day following it. Now, surveys show that 77% of the British public support a ban on nuclear weapons. How can you square that circle that you are doing something which is clearly against the will of the vast majority of the population? If we compare the amount of money being spent on military spending to how much the British government spends on the Environment Agency, then we have an annual budget of 0.13% of the government's annual spending goes on the Environment Agency, which has faced, prior to the pandemic, cuts of 40%. Now, that is an agency which supposedly regulates over 1 million businesses in the UK, but only employs about 1,000 people. Now, London alone, it is believed that you see 9,500 deaths a year from pollution. How is this imbalance justifiable? Research has found that, in fact, for every $1 billion that is invested in the arms industry, you only produce 11,200 jobs. When you compare that to something like clean energy, it's been found that every $1 billion invested in it creates 16,800 jobs. In healthcare, it produces that same $1 billion, 17,200 jobs. And in education, you see that $1 billion leading to 26,700 jobs. So in fact, the arms trade is not that great protector of British jobs that it is being depicted to be. We live through a period where 3 lockdowns in this country. You have had 1.4 million people survive through it with no recourse to public funds. In March 2020, there were 1.4 million people seeking job seekers allowance or universal credit. A year later, you have 2.6 million people seeking those things. Almost 1,000 homeless people across 2020 died in this country. We have far more important and better things and more socially useful things to spend money on than more toys for us to audition as the US's junior partner in more of its war games. The Spy Cops bill was put forward to give impunity domestically. The Overseas Forces bill was put forward to give impunity abroad. And the way that that unaccountability of the military state is buttressed is through the D-Notice Committee, which formerly was known as the DSMA Committee. It's where journalists go along and talk to civil servants, and the civil servants tell them dutifully what they would prefer they don't report. And in a lot of cases, in fact, the vast majority of cases, journalists do as they are told. They play a game of servility for access in order for the system to keep reproducing itself. But there is a lesson from history that we must force them to remember. Anti-war actors in this country have been victorious several times. We were victorious when Bertrand Russell got the death penalties applied to 34 conscientious objectors commuted during World War I. We were victorious when dock workers refused to load weapons onto the SS Jolly George to be sent to Russia to aid the British in their invasion of Russia after the revolution. We were victorious when the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign stopped Britain from joining the Americans in the Vietnam War in a meaningful way. We were victorious after an 11-year struggle at Greenham Common. It was the home to 96 nuclear missiles. And the Ministry of Defense said before those missiles were transported that they would quietly melt into the countryside. 11 years, women struggled at Greenham Common, cut their way into the base and disrupted this basis of power. Now, the last missiles left that base in 1991. Today, that base is not there and the weapons are not there anymore. But what is there is a plaque which commemorates those protesters at Greenham Common and commemorates it as a historic site. That is the poetic justice in which we play a vital part. Now, the son of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was responsible for the Panama Papers and was assassinated in a car bomb after that, said that the best way we can protect whistleblowers is to act on what they reveal. Now, the war on terror has produced many whistleblowers who have been martyred for what they have done. Our job is to act on the information that they reveal and stop future wars like the war on terror, costing lives of millions of people across the planet.